was sitting in my car after our annual Thanksgiving dinner when I realized my entire life savings, $185,000, had vanished from my bank account. When I confronted my family, my sister-in-law just laughed in my face and told me I should have known better than to trust them. She thought they had gotten away with the perfect crime. What she did not know was that I am a corporate bookkeeper, and the single phone call I was about to make would not just freeze their stolen money. It would destroy their entire fake empire. My name is Caroline Davis. I am 31 years old, and I work as a corporate bookkeeper for a logistics firm just outside of Shaker Heights, Ohio. I want to take you back to the exact moment my entire world fell apart, and then how I built it back up by tearing theirs down. It was Thanksgiving night. I had just left my parents' house. My back was aching, and my feet were sore from standing in their kitchen for the past 9 hours. I was the one who roasted the turkey. I was the one who set the table with my mother's expensive china. I was the one who cleaned up the mess while my parents, my older brother Travis and his wife Chloe, sat by the fireplace drinking expensive wine. That was my role in the Davis family. I was the reliable, quiet daughter who handled the chores so everyone else could enjoy the holiday. I was driving down a dark, quiet street, looking forward to finally going home to my small apartment and taking off my shoes. Then my phone chimed from the passenger seat. It was a sharp, sudden sound that broke the silence in the car. I glanced over at the screen and saw an automated text message from my bank. It was a low balance alert. I frowned. That made absolutely no sense. I had just gotten paid 2 days ago, and I am meticulous about my finances. You have to be when you are a bookkeeper. I put my blinker on and pulled into the glowing, empty parking lot of a CVS pharmacy. I put the car in park, picked up my phone, and opened my banking app. I typed in my passcode. The screen loaded. I stared at the digital numbers on the screen, waiting for my brain to process what I was looking at. My checking account had a balance of $14.32. My savings account, the secondary account, where I kept every single dollar I had ever saved for a down payment on a house, showed a balance of $0. $185,000 was completely gone. My hands started shaking so violently that I almost dropped my phone. The glowing screen blurred as tears stung my eyes. I could not breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed under a block of cement. That money was my entire future. It was 7 years of working 14-hour days, taking on extra clients, skipping vacations, and saving every extra penny so I could finally buy a home with a wraparound porch. It was my ticket out of renting. Gone. Just like that. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Panic is the enemy of a bookkeeper. I needed data. I clicked on the transaction history for the savings account. There it was at the very top of the screen, an outgoing wire transfer for exactly $185,000. The transaction description was blank. The receiving account number was hidden. I hit the call button for my bank's fraud department. The automated voice system felt like it was taking hours to process my requests. I kept pressing 0, desperate to speak to a human being. Finally, a representative answered. His name was Michael. I gave him my account number, my social security number, and my mother's maiden name, trying to keep my voice from breaking. Michael, I said, my voice cracking. My entire life savings just disappeared from my account. There is a wire transfer I did not authorize. You have to stop it. Please tell me you can reverse it. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard through the speaker. He asked me to confirm the amount and the time of the transaction. I see the transfer here, Caroline, Michael said. His voice was calm, but I could hear a shift in his tone. This was a massive transfer. It was initiated online. Are you absolutely certain you did not authorize this? I am sitting in a CVS parking lot crying, I told him. I did not move $185,000. Someone stole my money. You have to trace it. Where did it go? Who authorized it? Michael put me on a brief hold to escalate the issue to the fraud investigation team. Those 3 minutes sitting in my cold car were the longest of my life. I stared out at the harsh fluorescent lights of the pharmacy sign, my mind racing through every terrifying possibility. Had my identity been stolen? Had someone hacked my phone? When Michael came back on the line, he brought another investigator with him. Caroline, the investigator, said, "We are tracking the IP address where the wire transfer was initiated. This was not a foreign hack." The transfer was initiated from a residential IP address in Shaker Heights, Ohio. He read the address out loud to me. My heart stopped beating. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. It was not a random hacker. It was not an identity thief from halfway across the world. The address the investigator read to me was my parents' house. "What time exactly was this transfer initiated?" I asked. My voice did not sound like my own anymore. It sounded hollow and far away. "The timestamp is exactly 7:45 this evening," the investigator replied. 7:45, just 2 hours ago. I gripped the steering wheel. 2 hours ago, I was standing at the sink in my parents' kitchen. I was wearing an apron over my nice dress, scrubbing dried gravy off my mother's expensive serving platters. My hands were covered in soap and warm water. I was doing all the dirty work so my family could relax. And while I was washing their dishes, someone in that house, someone sitting comfortably in the living room just down the hall from me, was draining my life savings. It was not a stranger. It was my own flesh and blood. I thanked the investigator, told him I would call right back, and hung up the phone. I threw my car into reverse, my tires screeching against the wet pavement of the CVS parking lot. I did not drive to the police station. I drove straight back to the house I had just left. I was going to look them in the eye and demand my life back. I threw my car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the wet asphalt as I pulled out of the pharmacy parking lot. The drive back to my parents' house should have taken 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The tree-lined streets of Shaker Heights usually looked so peaceful and welcoming, especially on Thanksgiving night. The large colonial homes were lit up with warm yellow lights. Families were inside watching football and eating pie, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding in my life. But to me, the entire neighborhood suddenly looked like a giant trap. My mind was spinning out of control. $185,000. I kept repeating the number in my head like a chant. I thought about the overtime shifts, the weekends I spent buried in spreadsheets, while my friends went out the strict budgets I lived on just so I could build a secure future. I had deprived myself of so much, and someone in my own family had simply clicked a button and stolen it all. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My chest was heaving with every breath. I was terrified, yes, but more than that, I was furious. The kind of pure, blinding anger that makes your hands shake and your ears ring. I was not going to let them get away with this. I turned onto my parents' street and saw their large white house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The porch light was still on. My brother's silver luxury SUV was parked in the driveway, exactly where it had been when I left. They were still awake. They were probably still sitting by the fireplace, completely unbothered by what they had just done to me. I pulled my car up right behind my brother's SUV, threw it into park, and left the engine running. I practically kicked my car door open and marched up the brick walkway. The cold November wind whipped my hair across my face, but I did not even feel it. I reached the heavy oak front door and pounded on it with my bare fists. I hit the wood so hard, the decorative wreath rattled against the glass. "Open the door," I shouted. "I know you are in there. Travis, open this door right now." The porch light illuminated the manicured garden beds and the perfect welcome mat. Everything about this house was designed to project an image of a respectable, loving family. It was all a lie. I pounded on the door again, the sound echoing down the quiet suburban street. Finally, I heard the deadbolt click. The door swung inward, and my brother Travis stood in the entryway. He was wearing his expensive cashmere sweater, looking mildly annoyed rather than guilty. Behind him, the house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey. "What is wrong with you?" Caroline Travis hissed, stepping onto the porch and trying to pull the door partially shut behind him. "You are going to wake up the neighbors. Are you insane?" I did not lower my voice. "Where is my money, Travis?" I demanded, stepping right up to him. "Where is my $185,000? His eyes darted nervously over my shoulder toward the street, a momentary flash of panic crossing his face before he composed himself. I do not know what you are talking about, he said smoothly. Have you been drinking? You need to calm down and go home. You can sleep it off. Do not lie to me, I yelled. The bank traced the IP address. The wire transfer came from this house 2 hours ago while I was washing your dishes. Give me my money back right now. Before Travis could come up with another lie, the front door pulled wide open. My sister-in-law Chloe stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a crystal glass of Chardonnay. Her perfect blonde hair caught the porch light. She did not look panicked or guilty. She looked entirely bored. Chloe looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my practical winter coat and sensible shoes. She took a slow sip of her wine and smiled. It was a cold, condescending smile that made my stomach turn. She stepped past her husband and looked me right in the eye. You should have known better than trusting this family, Caroline. Travis needed capital. You are single and renting. What do you even need that much cash for? I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words. She was not just admitting to the theft. She was justifying it. I thought about the designer handbag hanging on her shoulder earlier tonight, the expensive highlights in her hair, the lavish vacations she constantly posted about on social media. I had spent 7 years packing my lunches, driving a 10-year-old sedan, and working through every single holiday just to save enough for a modest down payment on a house. And here was Chloe standing on the porch of a home I had helped maintain, sipping expensive wine that I had probably paid for, telling me that my future did not matter. She actually believed she was entitled to my life savings, because my life was somehow less important than hers, because I was single, because I was not living in a massive suburban house yet. She viewed my hard work as nothing more than a free funding source for her luxury lifestyle. She took another sip of her wine and let out a soft, dismissive snort. Grow up, Caroline. You are making a massive deal out of nothing. We will pay you back eventually when the business turns a profit. Now go home before you embarrass yourself in front of the entire neighborhood. She turned her back on me, grabbed Travis by the arm, and pulled him inside. The heavy oak door slammed shut in my face. The deadbolt clicked into place, locking me out in the cold. I stood on the porch, my breath pluming in the freezing air. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just cry in my car and accept my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy like I always did. They had no idea that their greed had just awoken a monster. Before I tell you how a single call to freeze an account unraveled their perfect suburban lie, hit that like button and subscribe. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. The heavy oak door had slammed in my face, but I refused to leave. I stood on the cold porch for a few seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard the lock click again. The door opened just enough for Travis to step out. He pulled his thick wool coat tightly around himself, glancing nervously at the neighbors' houses. He walked past me, heading down the porch steps toward the driveway. He clearly wanted to get me away from the front door so I would not make a scene. I followed him, my boots crunching on the frozen grass. I grabbed his arm and forced him to turn around. How did you do it? I demanded, my voice raw and shaking. How did you get into my private savings? Travis yanked his arm out of my grip. He leaned casually against the hood of his luxury SUV, looking completely unbothered. He sighed and rubbed his temples, acting like I was a stubborn child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. Caroline, please, do not be dramatic, he said smoothly. Your name is on that account, but my name is still on it too. Have you conveniently forgotten that? His words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. My mind snapped back to a terrifying week 3 years ago. The memory rushed in with sharp, painful clarity. Our father Thomas had suffered a massive heart attack right before the holidays. We spent 2 agonizing weeks living in the intensive care unit waiting room. I was the one managing the doctors. I was the one handling the endless insurance paperwork. I was the one paying the deductibles while the rest of the family sat around crying and panicking. Because I was so terrified that something might happen to me while I was managing the crisis, I made a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. Being a practical bookkeeper, I thought about worst-case scenarios. I went down to the local bank branch. I filled out the paperwork to temporarily add my older brother Travis as an authorized secondary user on my emergency savings account. I sat him down in the hospital cafeteria, looked him right in the eye, and told him the money was strictly a backup plan. I told him that if our father needed an emergency procedure and I was somehow unreachable, he had access to those funds to save our father's life. I trusted my brother. I trusted my family. Once our father recovered, I simply forgot to go back to the bank and remove his name. That was 3 years ago. I screamed, my voice echoing off the quiet suburban houses. Dad recovered. That money was my life savings, Travis. That was the down payment for my house. You had no right to touch it. Travis rolled his eyes and checked his expensive watch. Oh, please, Caroline. You live in a cheap apartment. You do not need a house right now. I have actual investments to manage. I just borrowed it to float a real estate deal. I stared at him in absolute horror. He used the word borrowed. He did not ask for my permission. He did not call me to discuss it. He just logged in and wiped out $185,000 of my hard-earned money without a second thought. The real estate market is tough right now, Caroline. He continued speaking to me as if he were explaining basic math to a slow student. You know that. I needed liquid capital to close on a massive commercial property downtown. The bank was delaying my loan approval, and I was going to lose the deal. I saw the money sitting uselessly in your account, so I moved it. It is just business. You stole from me, I said, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. You stole my future to fund your business. Travis scoffed, completely insulted by the accusation. I did not steal anything. The bank allowed the transfer because my name is legally on the account. That makes it entirely legal. Besides, I am going to pay you back with interest by Christmas. You should be thanking me. You'll make a better return on this deal than whatever pathetic interest rate your basic savings account was giving you. He was treating my entire life savings like a petty cash drawer. He spoke about my money as if it were his right to use it, as if he were doing me a favor by taking it. I thought about the 7 years of sacrifices I had made, the holidays I spent working extra bookkeeping shifts, the cheap meals I ate to save every possible dollar. And here was my brother wearing a sweater that cost more than my rent, lecturing me about business. I do not care about your real estate deal, I yelled, my anger finally boiling over into pure rage. I care that you took everything I have. Chloe is inside that house wearing brand new diamonds and my bank balance is at 0. I want my money back, Travis. Call your bank right now and reverse the wire transfer. Travis crossed his arms over his chest, his expression hardening. I cannot do that, Caroline. The funds are already locked in escrow for the commercial property. It is gone. Do not worry about it so much. You are single. You have no kids. You have no real responsibilities. What is the worst that happens to you? You just keep renting your little apartment for a few more months. My children need their father to build true wealth. I am building a family legacy here. You need to look at the bigger picture. He actually believed his own lies. He truly thought his life, his status, and his family were infinitely more valuable than mine. My hard work was nothing but a convenient funding source for his ambitions. I was standing in the freezing driveway, staring at a man I no longer recognized, realizing that my unconditional trust had been the biggest mistake of my life. Before I could take another breath to scream at my brother, the heavy oak door creaked open again. The warm yellow light from the foyer spilled out onto the frozen porch. My parents, Thomas and Susan, stepped outside. My mother was clutching her expensive wool cardigan tightly around her chest to ward off the November chill. My father stood right behind her, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his slacks. For a fraction of a second, a massive wave of relief washed over me. I was their daughter. Surely when I told them that Travis had just wiped out my entire life savings, they would be absolutely horrified. I expected my father to grab Travis by the collar. I expected my mother to start crying and demand that he return the money immediately. Mom, Dad, I gasped, my voice breaking as I pointed at Travis. He stole my money. He took $185,000 out of my emergency savings account. He transferred it to his own business account without asking me. You have to make him call the bank right now. I stood there trembling in the cold, waiting for their shock. I waited for their outrage, but the outrage never came. My father did not look at Travis. My mother did not gasp in horror. Instead, my mother let out a long, heavy sigh. It was the exact same sigh she used when I was a little girl and had accidentally spilled juice on the rug. She looked up and down the quiet street, checking to see if any of the neighbors had opened their curtains. Then she reached up, casually adjusted the collar of her cardigan, and looked at me with a completely flat expression. "Do not make a scene on the front lawn," Caroline, my mother, said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the freezing air like a knife. "The neighbors are watching. Your brother is building a future for his children. You need to be a supportive sister." I blinked completely, unable to process what she was saying. The neighbors. She was worried about the neighbors. I just told her that her son had stolen my entire future, and her first instinct was to protect the family image. "Mom, did you not hear me?" I pleaded, taking a step toward her. "He drained my account. My house fund is gone. 7 years of my life are just gone. Travis has a massive opportunity downtown." My mother continued, her tone dripping with condescension, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "He just needed a little help pushing the deal over the finish line." Families help each other, Caroline. That is what we do. My stomach completely dropped. The world around me seemed to stop spinning. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at Travis, who was now standing on the porch with a smug, victorious smile on his face. "You knew," I whispered. The realization hit me so hard, I felt physically sick. "You knew he was going to take my money." My father finally spoke up, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Now, Caroline, do not use the word steal. That is a very ugly word for a family matter. We discussed this with Travis yesterday. The bank was giving him a hard time about the commercial loan. He mentioned that your emergency fund had more than enough sitting in it, doing absolutely nothing." Doing nothing, I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. That money was for my own home. "You are single," my father said dismissively. "You rent a perfectly fine apartment. You do not have the financial burdens that a man with a wife and 2 growing children has. He is going to pay you back when the property turns a profit." We all agreed it was the most practical solution for the family. We all agreed. Those 3 words echoed in my mind over and over again. They held a family meeting about my money without me. They sat in their beautiful house, drinking wine and eating the food I cooked, and decided that my life savings belonged to them. In that exact moment, the illusion I had been clinging to for 31 years completely shattered. I saw my family for exactly what they were. I was not a daughter to them. I was not a sister. I was a financial safety net. I was a human bank account they could raid whenever the golden child needed a bailout. My dreams of owning a home, my years of working 14-hour shifts, my sacrifices, none of it mattered to them. In their eyes, because I did not have a wealthy husband or children to show off at the country club, my life had 0 value. My only purpose was to serve them and fund their perfect suburban lifestyle. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me with an expression of mild annoyance, waiting for me to apologize for raising my voice. I looked at my father, who was already turning back toward the warmth of the house, considering the matter resolved. Something deep inside of me broke, but it did not leave me fragile. It left me cold. The tears that had been burning in my eyes completely dried up. My hands stopped shaking. The blinding rage I had felt just moments ago turned into something sharp, focused, and absolutely lethal. "I am not a supportive sister," I said. My voice was no longer loud or hysterical. It was dead quiet, and it made my mother stop in her tracks. "And this is not a family matter." Travis laughed a nervous, mocking sound. "What are you going to do, Caroline? Call the police. Go ahead. The account is legally in my name, too. You gave me access. You have no case. You are just going to embarrass yourself and this family for absolutely no reason." I did not argue with him. I did not scream. I just looked at him with pure disgust. "I am going to handle this legally," I said, staring directly into my brother's eyes. "And when I am done, you are going to wish you had never learned my name." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on them, walked down the driveway, and got into my car. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving my parents and my brother standing on the porch. They thought they had won. They thought they had legally outsmarted me because of an old signature on a bank form. But they forgot one crucial detail. I am a corporate bookkeeper. I know exactly how the financial system works, and I knew exactly who to call tomorrow morning to bring their entire fake empire crashing down to the ground. I spent the entire weekend staring at the ceiling of my apartment. I did not eat. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chloe standing on that porch, sipping her wine, telling me my future did not matter. Monday morning could not come fast enough. At 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the bank even opened, I was standing outside the glass doors of the main branch in downtown Shaker Heights. The November wind was biting, but I did not feel the cold. I only felt the burning need to get my life back. Exactly at 9, a security guard unlocked the doors. I walked straight to the reception desk and told them I had an urgent appointment with the branch manager regarding a massive fraudulent wire transfer. Within minutes, I was escorted into a sterile glass-walled office. The branch manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Peterson, sat across from me. Next to him was a fraud investigator named Mr. Sterling, who had been assigned to my case after my frantic phone call on Thanksgiving night. Mr. Peterson folded his hands on his desk. He looked at me with that practiced, sympathetic expression that bankers use when they are about to deliver terrible news. Caroline. He started his voice low and careful. We have spent the weekend reviewing the transaction and the history of your secondary savings account. I need you to understand that our hands are tied by federal banking regulations. I leaned forward, my heart pounding against my ribs. What do you mean your hands are tied? I asked. My brother stole $185,000 from me. You traced the IP address to my parents' house. You know exactly where the money went. Just reverse the wire. Mr. Peterson sighed heavily. He slid a printed document across the desk. It was a copy of the account authorization form from 3 years ago. The one I had signed in the hospital cafeteria when my father was having his heart attack. Because you added Travis as a joint account holder with full privileges. Peterson explained he had the exact same legal rights to those funds as you did. From the bank's perspective, a joint owner moving money is not fraud. It is a standard transaction. We cannot reverse a wire transfer that was authorized by a legal account holder. The air vanished from the room. I stared at the piece of paper on the desk. My own signature stared back at me, mocking my blind trust in my family. I had done the responsible thing. I had tried to protect my parents during a medical crisis, and that very act of love was being used to strip me of everything I owned. I am a bookkeeper, I said, my voice trembling. I know how wire transfers work. You cannot just let someone wipe out nearly $200,000 without flagging it. It is my money. My direct deposits are the only ones that ever went into that account. Travis never contributed a single dime. I am so sorry, Caroline, Mr. Peterson said softly. The origin of the funds does not matter in a joint account. The law views the money as belonging equally to both parties. As of right now, the bank considers this a civil dispute between family members. We cannot intervene. Tears blurred my vision. I felt like I was suffocating. My family had won. Travis and Chloe were going to keep my house down payment, and the banking system was going to protect them. I closed my eyes, fighting back a sob. But then, the analytical part of my brain, the part that spent 7 years auditing corporate ledgers, suddenly woke up. If there is one thing a bookkeeper knows, it is that paper trails never lie and massive withdrawals always have rules. I wiped my eyes and sat up perfectly straight. I turned my attention away from the branch manager and looked directly at Mr. Sterling, the fraud investigator. Mr. Sterling had been quiet this entire time, studying a thick file folder in his lap. I want to see the wire transfer authorization log, I told him. My voice was no longer shaking. It was cold and precise. What do you mean? Mr. Peterson asked, looking confused. I ignored the branch manager and kept my eyes locked on the investigator. Standard banking protocol for this institution limits online residential wire transfers to $50,000 per day, I said, reciting the policy I knew by heart. Travis moved $185,000 in a single transaction on a Thursday evening, a national holiday, from a residential IP address. The automated system would have blocked that immediately. In order to push a transfer of that size through, he would have had to bypass the standard limits. Mr. Sterling slowly nodded his head. A look of sharp professional interest crossed his face. "You are absolutely correct, Caroline," the investigator said. He opened his folder and pulled out a stack of internal processing logs. An online transfer of that magnitude triggered our automated security freeze instantly. Your brother could not simply click a button and move the money. He had to request a temporary limit increase. I leaned over the desk, my pulse pounding in my ears. And how exactly did he manage to get a limit increase approved on a holiday evening, I asked. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and traced a line on the paper with his pen. "That is exactly what I have been looking at all morning," he said, his voice tightening with suspicion. To override a hard security limit on a joint account for a transaction of this size, the bank requires specific authorization. An online click is not enough. The system generated a secondary verification requirement. He slid the internal log across the desk so I could see it. Right there, highlighted in yellow, was a critical discrepancy regarding the transfer limit approval. Mr. Sterling looked me right in the eye. To push this money through your brother, had to submit a physical authorization form to our digital processing center. Mr. Sterling turned his computer monitor around so I could see the screen clearly. He clicked on a digital file attached to the wire transfer record. It was a scanned copy of a secondary authorization form. My eyes scanned the document. It was a standard bank form used for overriding daily transfer limits. The top section was filled out with my brother Travis and his business account details. The middle section requested a one-time limit increase to $185,000. And at the very bottom of the page on the line marked for the primary account holder was a signature. My signature. Or at least a terrible attempt at it. I stared at the looping cursive letters on the screen. It took my brain a few seconds to process what I was looking at. Travis had not just clicked a button on an app. He had gone out of his way to print a bank form, fill it out, and deliberately forge my name. The handwriting was clumsy. The slant of the letters was entirely wrong. It looked like he had tried to trace my signature from an old birthday card or a forgotten holiday gift tag. He was so incredibly arrogant. He truly believed he was so much smarter than everyone else that he could just scribble my name on a piece of paper and walk away with my entire life savings. I looked up from the screen and met Mr. Sterling's eyes. "I did not sign that," I said. My voice was steady and completely devoid of emotion. "That is a forgery." Mr. Peterson, the branch manager, visibly paled. He sat up straight in his leather chair, the sympathetic banker routine completely vanishing. He suddenly realized the massive liability sitting right in front of him. If the bank had processed a fraudulent transfer of that size based on a forged document, they were in serious trouble. "Are you absolutely certain?" Caroline, Mr. Peterson asked, his voice tight with panic. "I am a corporate bookkeeper," I told him, keeping my gaze locked on him. "I sign dozens of financial documents every single week. I know exactly what my signature looks like, and I know exactly where my money is supposed to be. I did not sign that form. My brother forged my name to steal my money." Mr. Sterling did not hesitate. He handed me a blank piece of printer paper and a pen. "Please sign your name exactly as you normally would," he instructed. I took the pen and signed my name 3 times in a row. My hand did not shake. My strokes were confident and precise. Mr. Sterling took the paper, held it up to the computer monitor, and compared my real signatures to the sloppy forgery Travis had submitted. The difference was undeniable. Anyone with functioning eyes could see that the person who signed the bank form was not the person sitting in that office. Mr. Sterling let out a slow breath and set the paper down. He looked at me with an expression of intense professional focus. "Caroline," he said quietly, "what I am about to tell you changes everything about this situation. Up until this exact moment, the bank viewed this as a civil dispute between 2 family members who shared a joint account. But submitting a document with a forged signature to bypass security protocols and move funds across institutions is no longer a family matter." "What is it then?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It is a federal crime," Mr. Sterling said. "The moment your brother transmitted this forged document to our digital processing center to authorize a transfer of $185,000, he committed wire fraud. He also committed bank fraud and identity theft." "These are felonies, Caroline." The words hung in the quiet office. Felonies. Federal wire fraud. I thought about my mother standing on the porch last night, telling me not to make a scene because the neighbors were watching. I thought about my father defending Travis, calling my stolen life savings a practical solution for the family. They had proudly defended a man who had just committed multiple federal crimes. They had gaslighted me and told me to be a supportive sister to a felon. Travis thought he had committed the perfect crime because we were family. He thought the blood connection would shield him from the law. Chloe thought she could flaunt her new diamond necklace at the country club while I quietly accepted my ruin. They had underestimated me my entire life, but their biggest mistake was underestimating the law. Are you willing to file a formal police report and press charges against your brother, Mr. Sterling? Asked, his pen poised over his notepad. I did not even have to think about it. Yes, I said immediately. Absolutely. Mr. Peterson wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. Mr. Sterling, what is our immediate protocol for a confirmed fraudulent wire of this magnitude? Mr. Sterling turned back to his keyboard. Because the receiving account is a commercial business entity held at our partner institution, and because we now have documented evidence of federal bank fraud, I have the authority to initiate an emergency freeze on the receiving end. My heart leaped in my chest. You can freeze his account, I asked. Mr. Sterling nodded, his fingers flying across the keys. I am submitting the fraud alert right now. The partner bank will lock his business account completely. He will not be able to withdraw a single cent. He will not be able to transfer the money out. He will not be able to use it to close any real estate deals. The funds will remain entirely frozen while the federal investigation takes place. I watched the computer screen as Mr. Sterling hit the enter key. A green confirmation banner popped up on his monitor. It was done. The trap was officially sprung. Travis had stolen my money on a Thursday night. It was now Monday morning. Banks do not process massive commercial real estate escrow transfers over the weekend. He probably thought the money would clear for his precious real estate deal by noon today. Instead, he was going to log into his business account and find a brick wall. He was completely locked out. He had no money for his deal. He had no money to pay his contractors. And worst of all, he had left a perfect digital paper trail of his own crimes. I stood up from the desk and thanked both men for their time. As I walked out of the bank and stepped into the crisp morning air, I took a deep breath. For the first time in my entire life, the heavy burden of trying to please my family had completely vanished. I did not feel like the spare daughter anymore. I felt like a woman holding a lit match standing right outside their house of cards. They wanted to treat me like I was invisible. Now, they were going to see exactly what happens when the invisible daughter decides to fight back. I walked into the corporate office of the logistics firm on Tuesday morning, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Thanksgiving night, I actually breathed a full breath of air. The federal bank freeze was in place. Travis was locked out of his business accounts, and my $185,000 was secured in a holding status while the investigators did their work. I sat down at my desk, organizing my financial reports, ready to dive into the quarterly reconciliations. The hum of the office printers and the smell of fresh coffee felt like a safe haven. This was my world. Here I was respected. Here I was not just the reliable daughter to be stepped on. I was Caroline Davis, the lead corporate bookkeeper, and people valued my integrity. At exactly 9:30, my phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. It buzzed over and over again in a relentless rhythm. I picked it up and saw 12 rapid-fire text messages from Travis. He had obviously tried to wire the funds for his real estate closing and hit the federal brick wall. His messages were pure venom. He demanded I call the bank and drop the fraud claim immediately. He called me a traitor. He said I was destroying the family. The final message chilled me to the bone. It read, "If you do not unfreeze my account by 10 o'clock, I am going to completely destroy your life." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing, and then I simply blocked his number. I put my phone in my drawer. I told myself he was just throwing a childish tantrum because he had finally been caught. I thought the worst was over. I had absolutely no idea how far my brother was willing to go to protect his fake empire. At 11 o'clock, I was right in the middle of a massive audit spreadsheet when my computer screen suddenly went completely black. A small white padlock icon appeared in the center of the monitor with a bold red message stating that my network access had been revoked by administration. I frowned and reached for my desk phone to call the IT department, thinking it was just a system error. Before I could even pick up the receiver, I heard heavy footsteps approaching my cubicle. I turned around to see Brenda, the director of human resources, standing behind my chair. She was a stern, uncompromising woman who rarely left the executive suite. Standing right beside her was one of the building security guards. The entire open plan office suddenly went dead quiet. My coworkers stopped typing. Telephones seemed to stop ringing. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto my desk. Caroline Brenda said, her voice completely devoid of its usual professional warmth. "I need you to step away from your computer immediately. Please gather your personal belongings and come with me to my office." My heart dropped into my stomach. I asked her what was wrong, but she just gave me a cold, hard look and pointed toward the hallway. My hands trembled as I grabbed my purse. I could feel the stares of my colleagues burning into my back as the security guard escorted me through the aisles. The walk to the HR office felt like an incredibly long, humiliating parade. When we stepped into Brenda's office, she closed the blinds tightly. She sat down behind her desk and folded her hands over a printed stack of papers. She did not offer me a seat. "We received a highly disturbing email this morning." Brenda began, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. It was sent directly to the CEO, the board of directors, and the HR department. It was sent by someone claiming to be a concerned citizen who felt morally obligated to warn us about our lead bookkeeper. Brenda picked up the top piece of paper and began to read it out loud. The email claimed that I was a dangerous financial predator. It stated that I was currently the primary target of an active federal investigation for wire fraud and embezzlement. The anonymous sender spun a brilliant, deeply malicious lie. They claimed that I had used my skills as a bookkeeper to systematically drain hundreds of thousands of dollars from my elderly parents' retirement accounts and my own brother's real estate business. The email warned my company that if they allowed me to continue managing their logistics ledgers, I would eventually drain their corporate accounts, just like I had destroyed my own family. It was Travis. He could not get to my money, so he went straight for my throat. He knew exactly what words would terrify a corporate executive. "Brenda, you have to listen to me," I pleaded, gripping the edge of her desk. "That email is a complete lie. It was sent by my brother. He is the one who forged my signature to steal my life savings. I went to the bank yesterday, and they froze his accounts for federal wire fraud. He is just retaliating because I caught him." I was practically begging her to understand, but I could see the cold wall of corporate liability shutting down right in front of me. Brenda shook her head slowly. "Caroline, we handle millions of dollars in freight contracts every single month," she said, her voice icy and final. "Integrity is the entire foundation of your job here. We cannot have a bookkeeper who is entangled in a federal wire fraud investigation involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Whether you are the victim or the perpetrator, this company simply cannot take on that kind of financial risk." She slid a formal letter across the desk. It was a notice of immediate suspension. "Pending a full internal investigation into these allegations, you are placed on unpaid administrative leave," Brenda said. "You must hand over your security badge, your office keys, and your company phone right now." I stared at the letter, completely paralyzed. Travis had taken my past savings, and now he had successfully reached out and ripped away my present livelihood. Without my job, I had no income. I could not pay my rent. I could not afford a lawyer to fight him. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and placed it on the desk. The security guard placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me out of the office. He walked me through the main lobby, pushing open the heavy glass doors to the street. I stood alone on the concrete sidewalk as the doors locked behind me. My reputation was completely ruined. My career was hanging by a single fragile thread. My family had stripped me of absolutely everything, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back. I stood on the concrete sidewalk outside my office building. The cold wind blew past me, but I felt completely numb. My entire career was slipping away because of an anonymous email. For about 5 minutes, I let myself feel the absolute crushing weight of the betrayal. Travis had stolen my savings, and now he was trying to steal my livelihood just to protect himself. He wanted me broke, unemployed, and too terrified to fight back. But Travis made one massive miscalculation. He forgot who he was dealing with. I am a corporate bookkeeper. My entire life revolves around tracking missing numbers, exposing discrepancies, and maintaining flawless records. I do not panic when the math does not add up. I find the error, and I fix it. I wiped my face, straightened my coat, and walked straight to my car. I was not going to go home and cry. I was going to work. My first stop was the local police precinct. I sat in a hard plastic chair and handed the detective the fraud alerts from my bank, the IP address trace, showing the transfer originated from my parents' house, and the copy of the forged authorization form. The detective took one look at the sloppy signature and the banking logs. Within an hour, I had an official police report for identity theft forgery and federal wire fraud listing my brother Travis as the primary suspect. My second stop was my apartment. I opened my personal laptop and went to work. I spent the next 14 hours compiling every single financial document of my entire adult life. I pulled 7 years of personal tax returns. I pulled every bank statement. I printed every pay stub. I gathered the digital receipts of every mortgage payment and utility bill I had ever paid on behalf of my parents. I organized them into clear, undeniable ledgers. Then I called a favor from an old mentor, a highly respected independent auditor who had trained me when I first got my CPA license. I explained the situation and sent him my entire encrypted file. I asked him to run a complete third-party audit on my personal finances and cross-reference them with my professional accounts. I needed an unimpeachable expert to verify that my money was clean earned through hard work and that I had never embezzled a single cent from anyone. He worked through the night. By Wednesday morning, I had a certified letter from his firm completely clearing my name and confirming my flawless financial history. I printed everything out and placed it into a thick leather binder. It was not just a defense, it was an absolute demolition of my brother's lies. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I walked right back through the glass doors of my logistics firm. The receptionist stared at me with wide eyes, knowing I was supposed to be suspended. I did not stop at her desk. I did not go to the human resources department. I marched straight up to the executive suite and stood in front of the door of the chief executive officer. His assistant tried to stop me, but I simply told her that I had legal documentation regarding the federal fraud allegations, and I was not leaving until he saw it. The CEO, a practical and sharp man named Mr. Harding, opened his door. He looked stern, but he let me in. I walked up to his massive mahogany desk and placed the heavy leather binder right in the center. "Mr. Harding," I said, my voice completely steady. "On Monday, this company received an anonymous email accusing me of embezzlement and wire fraud." That email was a malicious smear campaign designed to destroy my credibility. I am not the perpetrator of a financial crime. I am the victim. I opened the binder. I showed him the official police report naming my brother as the suspect for stealing my life savings. I showed him the bank documentation proving Travis forged my signature. Finally, I showed him the certified third-party audit of my entire financial history, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that every dollar I managed for this company was perfectly accounted for. Mr. Harding put on his reading glasses and read through the documents. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. As he read the police report and saw the sheer scale of what my brother had done to me, his stern expression melted into absolute shock and then into deep anger. He realized instantly that the company had punished an innocent woman based on a desperate criminal's lie. He took off his glasses and looked up at me. "Caroline," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "I am incredibly sorry. We have to protect the firm when allegations like this arise, but we should have given you the chance to explain. You are reinstated immediately with full back pay for the days you missed." I thanked him, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I reached for the binder, but Mr. Harding held up his hand to stop me. "Your brother thought he could use my company as a weapon against you," Mr. Harding said, his eyes narrowing with a fierce protective anger. "I do not take kindly to people dragging my business into their criminal activities. You need to crush him, Caroline, and you need the right person to help you do it." Mr. Harding opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, embossed business card. He slid it across the desk toward me. It read, "Richard Hayes, Senior Partner Financial Litigation." Richard is the most ruthless white-collar crime attorney in the state, Mr. Harding told me. He handles all of our corporate fraud defense. I am going to call him right now and tell him you are coming. He will tear your brother's fake business apart piece by piece. I took the business card. The gold lettering felt heavy in my hand. For a long time, I had held on to a tiny, pathetic shred of hope that my family would eventually love me. I had let them use me, drain me, and push me to the side, all because I wanted to believe that blood meant something. But looking at the police report, the forged signatures, and the vicious email Travis had sent to destroy my life, that last shred of hope completely evaporated. They did not view me as family. They viewed me as a threat to their perfect suburban illusion. They were willing to see me go to prison just so they could keep my money and buy luxury items. The betrayal did not make me sad anymore. It made me absolutely fearless. I looked at Mr. Harding and thanked him for the introduction. As I walked out of the executive suite, I slipped the attorney's card into my pocket. My brother and my parents thought they were dealing with the quiet, submissive daughter who always washed the dishes and moved her car out of the driveway. They were about to meet the woman who was going to take absolutely everything from them. Sunday arrived with a bitter chill that perfectly matched my mood. It was the day of the annual Shaker Heights Community Church fundraiser. In my family, this event was not just a simple charity gathering. It was the absolute epicenter of my parents' social world. It was the day where the wealthiest and most influential people in our pristine suburb gathered in the fellowship hall to drink overpriced coffee, bid on silent auction items, and pretend their lives were absolutely flawless. My mother, Susan, lived for this day. She spent weeks picking out the perfect outfit and rehearsing her talking points to ensure everyone knew just how successful her husband and her golden child son were. I almost did not go. After everything that had happened during the week after the bank freeze and the horrific slander at my corporate office, the last thing I wanted to do was put on a polite smile and eat stale pastries with the people who had betrayed me. But my new attorney, Richard Hayes, had given me very specific instructions. He told me to act completely normal. He told me to attend my usual family obligations and let them believe they had won. He said the most dangerous thing you can do to an arrogant criminal is let them feel comfortable while you quietly build their cage. So I put on my most modest Sunday dress, drove my 10-year-old sedan to the church, and walked into the lion's den. The fellowship hall was decorated with elegant floral arrangements and white linen tablecloths. Soft piano music played in the background, masking the sound of fierce social climbing and passive-aggressive gossip. I stood near the back corner near the coffee urns, holding a small paper cup. I watched my parents across the room. My father, Thomas, was aggressively shaking hands with local business owners, puffing out his chest and laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. My mother was holding court near the silent auction tables. She was wearing her finest wool suit, accepting compliments from the other wives with a tight, practiced smile. Neither of them even looked in my direction. I was back to being the invisible daughter. I was the reliable, boring bookkeeper who was supposed to fade into the background and let her brother shine. And then the doors to the fellowship hall swung open, and the star of the family made her grand entrance. My sister-in-law, Chloe, stepped into the room looking like she had just walked off a runway in Paris. She was dripping in brand new luxury. Even from across the large room, I could see the blinding sparkle resting against her collarbone. It was a brand new Cartier diamond necklace. The stones caught the fluorescent lights of the church hall, throwing little rainbows across the walls. On her arm, she carried a limited edition designer handbag that I knew for a fact cost more than my car. She strutted into the room with her head held high, radiating a toxic, overwhelming level of smugness. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. I knew exactly how she had funded that shopping spree. She had gone to the boutique on Friday or Saturday, using the credit cards she fully expected Travis to pay off with my stolen life savings. She had absolutely no idea that Travis was currently locked out of his frozen business accounts. She had no idea that her husband was under a federal wire fraud investigation. Travis had obviously hidden the terrifying truth from her to save face over the weekend. He was letting her parade around town, completely oblivious to the massive storm gathering right over their heads. Chloe scanned the room. Her eyes locked onto me, standing alone in the corner. A wicked, condescending smile spread across her perfect face. She did not walk over to say hello. Instead, she strategically marched toward a group of wealthy doctors' wives who were standing just a few feet away from my spot by the coffee urns. She positioned herself perfectly so that her back was half turned to me, but she was close enough that I could hear every single word she said. She began to project her voice, making sure it carried over the soft piano music. She touched her new diamond necklace, ensuring the other women noticed the expensive stones. "Oh, this little thing?" Chloe said loudly, letting out a fake breathy laugh. Travis completely surprised me with it yesterday. He has just been working so incredibly hard lately, and he wanted to celebrate his massive new real estate windfall. The other wives cooed and gasped, leaning in to admire the necklace. I stood perfectly still, gripping my paper cup so tightly the cardboard began to crush. "Yes." Chloe continued, raising her voice just a fraction more to make sure her words reached my corner. Travis just secured an absolutely enormous amount of liquid capital. His commercial property deal downtown is going to double our net worth by the end of the year. He is just so brilliant with money. He knows exactly how to leverage assets to build a real family legacy. It is just so wonderful being married to a man who knows how to take charge and secure our future. He does not let small-minded people hold him back. He takes what he deserves. Every single word was a deliberate dagger aimed right at my chest. She was bragging about stealing my future. She was standing in a church, wearing diamonds purchased with my tears and my 14-hour shifts, and she was framing it as her husband's brilliant business acumen. She viewed my devastation as her personal victory. She honestly believed that taking my money was their right simply because they were the golden family, and I was just the single renting sister who did not matter. I watched her toss her perfectly styled blonde hair and take a sip of her expensive, sparkling water. I saw my mother walk over to join her group, nodding approvingly at Chloe's new handbag. They looked so completely secure in their stolen wealth. They thought I had just rolled over and accepted my defeat. But as I listened to Chloe boast to the entire community about her husband's massive windfall, I did not feel the crushing despair I had felt on Thanksgiving night. I did not feel the panic that had consumed me in the Human Resources office. I felt a cold, hard sense of absolute justice. Let her brag, I thought to myself. Let her show off the diamonds. Let her tell every single person in Shaker Heights about this magical influx of cash. Because tomorrow morning, Richard Hayes was going to file the civil recovery suit, and the federal investigators were going to knock on their front door. Chloe was standing on a stage built entirely of lies, and I was holding the sledgehammer that was going to completely smash it to pieces. I watched Chloe standing there in the middle of the church fellowship hall, bathed in the warm fluorescent lighting. She was waiting for me to break. I could see it in the slight tilt of her head and the cruel gleam in her eyes. She expected me to drop my paper coffee cup and storm over to her. She wanted a screaming match right there next to the silent auction tables. She wanted me to look like the crazy, jealous, hysterical sister who simply could not handle her brother's success. If I yelled at her in front of all these prominent Shaker Heights wives, my parents would immediately rush over, grab me by the arm, and drag me out of the building. They would spin the narrative perfectly. They would tell everyone that poor Caroline was having a mental breakdown because she was lonely and bitter. That was their playbook. That had always been their playbook. For 28 years, I had played right into their hands. I had cried when they excluded me. I had raised my voice when they belittled me, and every single time I reacted with genuine human emotion, they used it as proof that I was unstable and difficult. But I was not that girl anymore. The terrified, betrayed woman who pounded on their front door on Thanksgiving night was gone. In her place stood a corporate bookkeeper who was currently holding the power to send her own brother to federal prison. I did not drop my coffee cup. I did not raise my voice. I took a very slow, deep breath, letting the smell of roasted coffee and expensive floral perfumes ground me in the present moment. Instead of giving Chloe the massive public meltdown she was desperately craving, I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of calculating predator smile that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I saw Chloe notice it. Her perfect posture faltered for just a fraction of a second. She blinked, clearly confused by my reaction. I held her gaze from across the room, completely unbothered, while my right hand slowly slipped into the deep pocket of my modest wool coat. My fingers traced the smooth edge of my smartphone. Without ever breaking eye contact with my sister-in-law, I used my thumb to unlock the screen. Because I used this phone to dictate financial memos during long audit drives, I knew the exact physical location of the voice recorder app on my home screen. 2 swipes to the right, 1 tap in the bottom left corner, 1 tap in the center to start recording. I felt the familiar tiny vibration that told me the microphone was active and capturing audio. I left the phone right there in my pocket, the microphone perfectly positioned to pick up every single word echoing through the high ceilings of the church hall. I took a slow sip of my coffee, leaned comfortably against the wall, and gave Chloe a slight encouraging nod. I was silently daring her to keep talking, and because Chloe possessed absolutely zero self-awareness, she took the bait. She turned back to the circle of wealthy doctors' wives, raising her voice even louder than before. She wanted to make absolutely sure that the pathetic, poor sister in the corner heard every detail of her fabulous life. I just could not believe it when I saw the bank statement. Chloe gushed, her voice bouncing off the brick walls and echoing perfectly toward my pocket. Travis has been keeping this massive commercial deal a secret for months. Then last Thursday night, right after Thanksgiving dinner, he showed me the accounts. He transferred a huge lump sum of cash directly into our personal holding account. I mean, an absolutely enormous amount of liquid cash. One of the older wives gasped lightly, touching her chest. "Oh my goodness, Chloe, that is just wonderful," she said. "The real estate market is so tough right now. Your Travis is a genius." "He really is," Chloe agreed, puffing out her chest. "He told me that since he managed to secure such a massive cash injection, we needed to celebrate immediately. He said the commercial property closing would not happen for a few more days, so we had plenty of time to enjoy the weekend. He specifically told me to go straight to the Cartier boutique on Saturday morning and buy whatever I wanted. He wired the funds to cover it the very next day." She reached up and ran her perfectly manicured fingers over the sparkling diamond necklace resting against her skin. She held up her limited edition designer handbag, turning it slightly so the women could admire the craftsmanship. "Between this necklace and the bag, we practically spent a down payment on a house." Chloe laughed, completely oblivious to the massive confession she was broadcasting to the room. But Travis said it did not matter. He said the cash was ours to do whatever we wanted with. He said it was basically free money. I stood in the corner, still smiling that cold, silent smile, while my phone recorded every single syllable. My heart was racing, not out of panic, but out of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had no idea what she had just done. Travis thought he was so smart by forging my signature and wiring my life savings into his commercial business account. But the federal bank freeze had stopped him from moving that money any further. He could not access it. So to keep up appearances and stroke his own massive ego, he had used his personal credit cards to buy his wife luxury goods, banking on the fact that my stolen funds would eventually clear and cover the massive debt. By bragging about a huge lump sum of cash transferred on Thursday night, and then explicitly tying that specific cash transfer to the purchase of high-end luxury goods, Chloe was not just being obnoxious. She was providing a recorded, detailed confession of money laundering. She was openly admitting that her husband was using illegally obtained funds to finance their personal luxury purchases. This was not just wire fraud anymore. My brother was officially commingling stolen assets with his personal marital spending. And his wife was standing in a church surrounded by 30 witnesses giving me the exact audio evidence I needed to prove it to a federal prosecutor. I looked over at my mother, who was still standing nearby, nodding proudly at Chloe's terrible display of wealth. My mother had told me not to make a scene. She had told me to be a supportive sister. She wanted to protect the family reputation above all else. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the warm liquid soothe my dry throat. I did not need to scream. I did not need to cry or throw a tantrum on the front lawn. I just needed to let them talk. This recording was the absolute golden ticket. Richard Hayes, the ruthless corporate attorney my boss had connected me with, was going to have an absolute field day with this audio file. Travis was going to lose his business, his reputation, and his freedom. And Chloe, the woman who thought my future did not matter, had just handed me the final nail for their coffin wrapped in a perfect diamond bow. I parked my 10-year-old sedan in the underground garage of the towering glass building downtown. I held the heavy leather binder tightly against my chest as I rode the elevator up to the 47th floor. The polished brass doors opened to the reception area of Hayes & Associates. The office screamed quiet, ruthless power. There were no warm colors, just sleek marble floors, and an absolute silence that told you very serious business was conducted here. The receptionist immediately escorted me down a long hallway to a massive corner office overlooking the city skyline. Richard Hayes was not a man who wasted time with pleasantries. He was wearing an impeccable custom suit with sharp gray eyes that seemed to analyze every detail about me. He motioned for me to sit opposite his desk and asked what I had brought him. I placed the binder down and explained the entire situation from the beginning. I told him about the joint account, the forged authorization form, the federal bank freeze, and the vicious anonymous email Travis had sent to my human resources department to try and get me fired. Richard opened the binder and began reviewing the documents. His face remained completely neutral as he examined the police report and the third-party audit of my personal finances. Then I pulled out my smartphone. I told him about the church fundraiser on Sunday. I told him how my sister-in-law Chloe had strutted into the fellowship hall wearing a brand new Cartier diamond necklace and carrying a designer handbag. I explained how she had loudly bragged to a group of wealthy wives about Travis moving a massive lump sum of cash on Thursday night, specifically to fund her luxury shopping spree. I tapped the screen and played the audio recording for him. The sound of Chloe's smug voice filled the quiet law office. We listened as she openly confessed that her husband had wired the funds and told her it was free money to do whatever she wanted with. When the recording finished, Richard leaned back in his chair with a slow, incredibly sharp smile. He told me that my brother had committed federal wire fraud by forging my signature, but my sister-in-law had just provided undeniable audio evidence of money laundering. Travis had taken stolen funds and immediately commingled them with personal marital assets to buy luxury goods. Richard said this was the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about. Richard leaned forward and asked me the most important question of the day. He wanted to know exactly where the rest of the $185,000 was supposed to go before the bank froze the receiving account. Travis had claimed he needed the liquid capital to close on a massive commercial property downtown. He had told my parents he was building a real estate empire. Richard wanted to see exactly what kind of empire my brother was actually running. We spent the next 4 hours sitting in that office, drinking black coffee and digging deep into the public records and corporate filings of Travis and his real estate limited liability company. With Richard's access to advanced financial databases and my expertise as a corporate bookkeeper, we began to peel back the layers of my brother's supposedly brilliant business. What we found was absolutely staggering. Travis was not a successful real estate mogul. He was a desperate man drowning in bad debt. His limited liability company was tied to 3 different commercial properties, but they were bleeding money. He had taken out predatory loans with extremely high interest rates just to keep the lights on. Richard pulled up a civil court registry and found 2 pending lawsuits against Travis from unpaid contractors. He also found a notice of default on one of his primary commercial mortgages. Travis was completely broke. He did not take my money to invest in a brand new opportunity. He took my life savings because his lenders were threatening to seize his existing properties. My money was supposed to be a desperate bailout to stop his entire fake empire from collapsing into foreclosure. I sat back in my chair, staring at the financial records spread across the mahogany desk. My parents had looked at me with such disdain, telling me that Travis was securing a legacy for his children and that I needed to support him. They believed he was a genius. They believed I was just a single renting woman with no real ambition. But the truth was right here in the math. I had built a solid, secure life through years of discipline and sacrifice. Travis had built a house of cards fueled by arrogance and debt. And when his house of cards began to fall, he decided to set mine on fire to save himself. Richard told me that the federal bank freeze I had initiated had effectively destroyed whatever timeline Travis had to pay his angry lenders. By locking that stolen money, I had prevented him from making the critical payments he desperately needed to make by the end of the month. He was trapped. He could not access the money, and he did not have a single dime of his own left to save his business. For 28 years, I had let my family dictate my worth. I had let them take my energy, my time, and eventually my money, all because I wanted to be a good daughter and a supportive sister. But looking at the undeniable proof of my brother's financial ruin, I realized I did not owe them anything anymore. Richard told me we had enough evidence to secure the return of my funds and ensure Travis faced massive civil and criminal penalties. We were going to file a comprehensive civil suit for damages, fraud, and defamation. I gave him my full permission to proceed. We were going to take them down. Richard Hayes leaned closer to his monitor and tapped his pen against the screen. He told me that the commercial real estate documents we had been reviewing were not making any sense. Travis had set up a limited liability company 3 years ago, but the financial structure was a complete disaster. Richard pulled up the public tax records and cross-referenced them with the banking details we had managed to obtain through his legal channels. My brother was not just failing at real estate, he was barely even pretending to be in the business anymore. There were no active commercial properties under contract. There were no construction crews waiting for funding. There were no permits filed anywhere in the state. The entire business was a hollow shell, a fake front designed to look impressive on paper. I sat there in the heavy leather chair, feeling a cold knot form deep in my stomach. I asked Richard where my $185,000 was supposed to go if there was no commercial property deal. Richard typed rapidly on his keyboard and brought up another set of confidential records. He explained that a forensic sweep of the routing numbers associated with my brother's accounts painted a terrifying picture. Travis was not moving money to escrow accounts or title companies like he had claimed. He was wiring massive sums of cash to offshore accounts and out-of-state entities known specifically for processing online gambling transactions. My brilliant brother, the golden child who my parents believed was securing a massive family legacy, was completely consumed by a horrific gambling addiction. He had been bleeding money for years. He was taking out high-interest personal loans, maxing out credit cards, and blowing through thousands of dollars a week on sports betting and online casinos. The commercial real estate business was just a convenient lie he used to explain why he was constantly asking for investments and why his bank accounts were always fluctuating wildly. My life savings was not going to float a downtown property deal to secure his children's future. It was going to pay off dangerous bookies and cover his massive gambling debts. He was a desperate addict, and he had stolen my entire future simply to buy himself a few more months of breathing room. I thought the betrayal could not possibly get any worse, but Richard was not finished uncovering the truth. He told me that a gambling addiction of this magnitude requires a constant stream of cash, far more than my brother could steal from my secondary savings account. Richard pulled up the county property registry to check if Travis had leveraged any other family assets to feed his habit. He searched my parents' address. I told him he was wasting his time because my parents had paid off their beautiful colonial home 15 years ago. They owned it completely free and clear. It was their ultimate pride and joy, the crown jewel of their perfect suburban image. Richard shook his head slowly and turned the large monitor so I could see the screen clearly. My breath caught in my throat. Right there, filed just 6 months ago, was a massive second mortgage on my parents' estate. The loan was for over $400,000. I told Richard that was impossible because my parents would never borrow money against their paid-off home. They absolutely hated debt. They prided themselves on their financial security and pristine credit scores. Richard pulled up the digital copy of the mortgage deed and zoomed in on the signatures at the very bottom of the page. I stared at the looping cursive letters, spelling out my father Thomas and my mother Susan. The handwriting looked exactly like the clumsy traced letters on my forged wire transfer form. Travis had not just stolen from me, he had secretly forged our parents' signatures to take out a massive loan against their house. He had stolen $400,000 of their home equity to feed his gambling addiction. The monthly payments on a loan that size were enormous, and Travis had clearly been intercepting the mail and hiding the default notices. He was drowning, and to keep himself afloat, he had quietly pushed our parents right to the absolute brink of foreclosure and total homelessness. I sat in the quiet law office, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of my brother's crimes. I thought back to Thanksgiving night on the freezing porch. I thought about my mother telling me not to make a scene and demanding I be a supportive sister. I thought about my father casually dismissing my stolen life savings as a practical business solution for the family. They had looked at me with such cold disdain, protecting their golden son at all costs. They had fiercely defended the very man who was secretly destroying their lives behind their backs. They had thrown me away like garbage to protect a son who had already signed away the literal roof over their heads. The irony was so bitter and so profound that I almost wanted to laugh. My parents thought they were sitting comfortably in their flawless suburban castle, completely unaware that Travis had already sold it out from under them to pay off a casino. They thought I was the unstable, jealous daughter trying to ruin their peace. They had absolutely no idea that I was the only person standing between them and total financial ruin. I looked across the desk at Richard Hayes. He asked me what I wanted to do with this new information. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling every ounce of residual loyalty to my family completely evaporate into thin air. I told him we were going to let the federal bank freeze run its course. I told him we were going to build an ironclad criminal case. I was not going to warn my parents. They had chosen their side on Thanksgiving night. They had chosen Travis. Now they were going to have to live with the consequences of that choice. The invisible daughter they had discarded was about to become the architect of their ultimate reality check. I was going to finish this. Every single December, the Shaker Heights Country Club hosts the prestigious Winter Gala. For my parents, Thomas and Susan, this event was never just a simple holiday party. It was the absolute pinnacle of their entire social existence. It was their annual coronation. For the past 2 decades, my mother had spent months meticulously planning her designer outfit, her expensive jewelry, and her perfectly rehearsed talking points. It was a massive ballroom filled with local politicians, wealthy business owners, and prominent doctors. To be seen sitting at the center table meant you had truly arrived in high society. To my parents, it meant they were completely untouchable. They used this specific gala to project the flawless illusion of our affluent, happy family. I was always expected to attend, wearing a highly modest dress, keeping my mouth shut, and basically acting as an unpaid assistant. I would take coats, fetch drinks, and smile politely, while my parents bragged endlessly about my older brother Travis and his amazing accomplishments. I was merely the quiet background prop they used to show their friends how grounded their family was. It had been a few weeks since the confrontation at the bank and my strategic silence at the church fundraiser. Since that day, I had spent every single waking hour working closely with my attorney, Richard Hayes. We were building an absolute fortress of legal evidence against my brother. We had the forged bank documents, the audio recording of Chloe confessing to money laundering, and the terrifying proof of the fraudulent second mortgage Travis had secretly taken out on my parents' estate to cover his gambling addiction. The trap was perfectly set, and the federal investigators were quietly circling. Travis was still completely locked out of his frozen business accounts, desperately trying to keep his fake real estate empire from collapsing into dust. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a cold Tuesday evening, surrounded by heavy legal files and complex financial spreadsheets, when I decided to go down to the lobby and check my mail. I expected to find standard utility bills and junk mail. Instead, I found a thick, heavy cream-colored envelope sitting in my metal mailbox. The paper was incredibly expensive and heavily textured. The calligraphy on the front was done entirely by hand. I recognized my mother's sweeping, pretentious handwriting immediately. It was an official invitation to the Shaker Heights Country Club Winter Gala. I carried the heavy envelope back up to my apartment and dropped it onto my kitchen table right on top of a stack of bank fraud evidence. The visual contrast was almost poetic. I slowly slid my finger under the wax seal and pulled out the invitation. It was printed on thick cardstock with shining gold foil lettering, announcing the 50th annual Winter Gala. It listed my parents, Thomas and Susan, as gold tier sponsors. I knew for a fact that title alone cost $10,000. I slowly shook my head, wondering how my father had managed to pay for a gold-tier charity sponsorship when his golden child son had secretly mortgaged their family home to the absolute brink of foreclosure just to pay off dangerous casino debts. It was a masterclass in financial delusion. But the real shock was not the expensive invitation itself. It was the handwritten note tucked neatly inside the envelope. I pulled out a smaller matching cream-colored card. My mother's handwriting filled the space with a message so incredibly condescending and passive-aggressive that it actually made me laugh out loud in my empty apartment. The note read, "We know you have been struggling lately, Caroline. Your recent behavior has been very disappointing and completely unacceptable. But it is the holidays and family always comes first. Travis is willing to be the bigger person and overlook your outburst. Come to the gala on Saturday night and apologize to your brother, and we can go back to being a family again. Do not throw your life away over a simple misunderstanding. We have a seat waiting for you." I sat in my quiet apartment and read those words over and over again. Come and apologize to your brother. The sheer massive scale of their psychological delusion was absolutely staggering. They truly believed they still held all the power. They honestly thought that I was sitting alone in my cheap apartment, crying my eyes out, and completely desperate to be allowed back into their wealthy social circle. My mother actually believed that threatening to withhold her toxic conditional love would bring me crawling back on my knees. They thought that cutting me off from their precious country club gala was the ultimate punishment for my disobedience. They deliberately framed my brother's federal wire fraud, his outright theft of my entire life savings, and his secret destruction of their own home equity as a simple misunderstanding that I needed to apologize for. They wanted me to stand in front of the entire country club wearing a cheap dress and apologize to the golden child for getting angry that he stole my future. For 28 years, that specific manipulation tactic would have worked perfectly. The old Caroline would have been absolutely terrified of losing her family. The old Caroline would have convinced herself that keeping the peace was far more important than her own financial security or self-respect. She would have put on a brave face, gone to the gala, swallowed her immense pride, and begged for forgiveness just to avoid being cast out into the cold. My parents were heavily relying on that lifetime of emotional conditioning. They were so thoroughly blinded by their own arrogance that they could not fathom a reality where their quiet, reliable bookkeeper daughter had finally learned how to fight back. They were sitting in their beautiful, paid-off colonial home, totally unaware that the bank was preparing to seize it from them. Travis was walking around town, pretending to be a millionaire real estate mogul, while federal agents were preparing his criminal indictment. They were all standing on a massive trapdoor that was about to swing wide open, and they were using their final moments of comfort to demand an apology from the one person holding the executioner's rope. I looked down at the gold foil invitation and then looked at the massive stack of legal documents Richard Hayes had prepared for me. My parents wanted me to come to the gala. They wanted me to witness their grand social triumph. They wanted me to watch Travis and Chloe parade around the ballroom, flaunting their stolen luxury goods. They wanted me to bow my head and accept my place at the absolute bottom of the family hierarchy. I picked up the invitation and smiled. It was the same cold, calculating smile I had given Chloe at the church fundraiser. My mother wanted me to attend her precious winter gala. I decided right then and there that I would absolutely go, but I wasn't going to wear a modest dress. I was not going to fade into the background, and I was certainly not going to apologize. I was going to accept their gracious invitation, and I was going to deliver a response they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I took a heavy black pen and firmly checked the box next to joyfully accepts on my mother's thick cardstock RSVP card. I sealed the elegant envelope and walked it straight down to the corner mailbox. There was absolutely no turning back now. My parents wanted me at their prestigious Shaker Heights Country Club Winter Gala. They wanted the submissive little corporate bookkeeper to show up with her head bowed, ready to beg for scraps of their conditional love. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to attend their perfect social event. But I was bringing the absolute destruction of their flawless suburban illusion right through the front doors. For my entire life, my parents had demanded my quiet obedience. This Saturday, they were going to get my reckoning. The next 3 days were an absolute blur of intense legal strategy and federal coordination. I essentially lived in the polished corner office of my attorney, Richard Hayes. Early Wednesday morning, Richard brought in 2 federal investigators who specialized specifically in white-collar crime and corporate wire fraud. Sitting across the mahogany desk from these stern, calculating agents, I laid out every single piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered. I handed over the forged bank documents showing Travis transferring my $185,000. I provided the crystal-clear audio recording of my sister-in-law, Chloe, loudly confessing to money laundering at the church fundraiser. I explained how Travis had used his personal credit cards to fund her luxury shopping spree, fully expecting my stolen savings to cover his massive debts. But the absolute crown jewel of our digital dossier was the paperwork for the fraudulent second mortgage. The federal agents physically leaned forward when they saw the forged signatures of my parents on a $400,000 loan against their paid-off estate. Travis had not just stolen from his sister. He had committed massive federal bank fraud and identity theft against his own parents to feed his secret gambling addiction. The investigators meticulously compiled all of this information into a highly secure digital dossier. They were building an ironclad federal indictment right in front of my eyes. The lead agent told me that because Travis had used interstate banking channels to launder the stolen cash, he was facing mandatory minimum sentencing in a federal penitentiary. Richard Hayes prepared a separate civil suit to immediately freeze and seize any remaining assets Travis or Chloe possessed. The trap was not just set, it was locked, loaded, and completely inescapable. The federal investigators agreed to hold off on their official raid until Monday morning. They wanted Travis to feel completely secure over the weekend. They wanted him to drop his guard and celebrate at the gala, thinking he had successfully gotten away with ruining my life. As Friday afternoon rolled around, the sheer massive weight of what I was about to do finally hit me. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by copies of the federal affidavits. I was about to completely dismantle my own family. I was about to expose my golden child brother as a desperate criminal and watch my parents realize they were standing on the absolute brink of foreclosure. A tiny, fragile part of me felt a brief wave of nausea. It was the lingering shadow of the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her. But then, I remembered the cold, disgusted look on my father's face when he told me my life savings was just a business casualty. I remembered my mother demanding I apologize to the man who tried to destroy my career. They did not view me as a human being. They viewed me as collateral damage. The sorrow completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, burning resolve. I was not doing this out of petty revenge. I was doing this to survive. I was doing this because if I did not stand up for myself, nobody else ever would. The guilt was completely gone. I was purely focused on absolute justice. That evening, I drove to a high-end boutique in the wealthy part of downtown. For 28 years, my mother had dictated exactly what I was allowed to wear to her social events. She always forced me into dull, muted colors. Navy blue, beige, slate gray. She wanted me to look completely invisible so I would never draw an ounce of attention away from Travis and his beautiful wife, Chloe. I walked right past the racks of conservative pastel dresses and went straight to the exclusive designer section. I pulled out a stunning floor-length gown. It was not navy or beige. It was a brilliant, unapologetic crimson red. The heavy silk fabric hugged my waist perfectly and flowed beautifully to the floor. It featured a sharp, elegant neckline that demanded attention. It was striking, confident, and completely impossible to ignore. It was the dress of a woman who owned her space and refused to make herself small for anyone. I bought it without even checking the price tag. I paired it with sharp black stiletto heels and a bold red lipstick I had never dared to wear before. When I looked in the full-length mirror on Saturday afternoon, the timid, obedient bookkeeper was completely gone. The woman staring back at me was a force of nature. She was fearless and she was ready. My family had invited their quiet punching bag to the country club gala. They had absolutely no idea that they were opening the door for their executioner. The drive to the Shaker Heights Country Club took exactly 20 minutes, but it felt like an entire lifetime. Snow had begun to fall lightly from the dark winter sky, dusting the manicured lawns and massive brick estates that lined the winding suburban roads. I pulled my reliable 10-year-old sedan into the long circular driveway of the club. Ahead of me was a seemingly endless line of imported luxury vehicles. There were sleek black town cars, massive premium sport utility vehicles, and expensive sports cars waiting for the eager valet attendants. Usually, I would feel a deep sense of embarrassment pulling up in my highly practical commuter car. Usually, I would bypass the valet entirely and park in the very back of the overflow lot just to avoid the judgmental stares of the country club staff. But tonight, I did not care about their judgment. I pulled right up to the front doors and handed my keys to the valet with absolute unbothered confidence. I stepped out into the freezing winter air and took a long, deep breath. The cold wind bit at my cheeks, but it only made me feel more awake and alive. I smoothed the heavy fabric of my winter coat and walked up the wide stone steps toward the grand entrance. The moment I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, the sheer overwhelming opulence of the winter gala hit me like a physical wave. The Shaker Heights Country Club spared absolutely no expense for their 50th annual holiday event. The grand foyer was decorated with towering, elaborate arrangements of white winter roses and shimmering silver branches. To my left, a massive ice sculpture shaped like a regal swan was slowly melting next to an overflowing tiered champagne fountain. To my right, a live string quartet was playing soft, elegant classical music that floated over the crowd. The entire building hummed with the steady sound of clinking crystal glasses and the low, confident murmur of the absolute wealthiest people in the city. This was the undisputed playground of the local elite. The ballroom was completely packed with prominent chief surgeons, aggressive corporate lawyers, and powerful local politicians. These were people who built their entire lives around strict public perception and flawless social standing. I walked over to the coat check counter and handed my heavy wool winter coat to the smiling attendant. As the dark coat slipped off my shoulders, I felt a sudden electric thrill rush through my veins. For 28 years, my mother had forced me to wear dull, lifeless colors. She had always made sure I wore modest navy or faded gray dresses so I would simply blend into the background like a piece of quiet wallpaper. But tonight, I was wearing the floor-length crimson red silk gown I had purchased at the exclusive downtown boutique. The dress was an absolute masterpiece of design. It hugged my waist perfectly and flowed elegantly with every single step I took. It was bold, vibrant, and completely unapologetic. I adjusted my posture, pulling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. I had spent my entire adult life shrinking myself down to make my arrogant family feel more comfortable. Tonight, I was taking up every single inch of space I deserved. I turned away from this coat check and walked slowly toward the grand entrance of the main ballroom. The heavy double doors were pinned wide open, revealing a massive sea of black designer tuxedos and sparkling sequined gowns. Usually, when I attended these intimidating social events, I would immediately hug the walls, trying to find the quickest and most invisible path to the darkest corner of the room. Tonight, I walked straight down the exact center aisle. As I moved gracefully through the dense crowd, I could feel the energy in the room subtly shift. Conversations paused, and drinks were lowered as people turned their heads to look at me. The crimson-red dress was a blinding flash of gorgeous color in a large room dominated by strict black and silver dress codes. People who had ignored me for my entire existence were suddenly staring in absolute shock. They recognized me as Thomas and Susan's quiet little bookkeeper daughter, but they could not reconcile that pathetic memory with the powerful, radiant woman currently gliding right past them. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, completely ignoring the rising whispers as I scanned the massive room. It did not take me very long to find my family. They were seated at a prime premium table right in the absolute center of the ballroom, completely bathed in the warm, golden glow of a massive crystal chandelier hanging directly above them. The elite placement of their table was a direct testament to their highly expensive gold-tier sponsorship status. My father Thomas was standing near his velvet chair, holding a heavy glass of expensive bourbon. He was laughing loudly at a joke told by a local city councilman, perfectly playing the role of the highly successful, wealthy patriarch. My mother, Susan, was seated looking incredibly regal and untouchable in a custom silver beaded gown. And right beside them, holding court like absolute royalty, were Travis and Chloe. Travis was wearing a sharply tailored black tuxedo, looking perfectly relaxed and completely in his element. He had a tall glass of champagne in one hand, and he was casually telling a captivating story to a group of admiring older businessmen. He was flawlessly pretending to be a brilliant commercial real estate mogul. He was projecting the ultimate polished image of a wealthy young financial visionary. He looked so incredibly secure and comfortable. He had absolutely no idea that his entire fake empire was already completely dead. He had no idea that federal investigators were simply waiting for Monday morning to tear his entire life apart. Next to him, Chloe was leaning back in her chair with a deeply smug smile on her face. She was wearing her brand new Cartier diamond necklace. The stolen stones caught the bright chandelier light, sparkling brightly for every single person in the room to admire. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still about 30 feet away from their table. I just watched them for a long moment, letting the absolute reality of their massive delusion sink into my mind. And then Travis finally turned his head and saw me. Our eyes locked across the crowded, busy ballroom. For a split second, he looked genuinely surprised to see me wearing such a striking red dress instead of my usual dull wardrobe. But that initial surprise quickly melted into a deeply arrogant, knowing smirk. He nudged Chloe and pointed his crystal champagne glass discreetly in my exact direction. Chloe turned her head and saw me standing there in the middle of the aisle. Her face immediately broke into a wide, mocking smile. She completely believed she had won the war. She thought I was standing there in my nice new dress, trying to desperately prove I belonged in their wealthy world. She thought I was a pathetic, defeated victim who had finally come crawling back to beg for their mercy. My mother noticed their reaction and followed their gaze across the room. Susan looked at me, and her eyes rapidly swept over my crimson silk dress with a brief, unmistakable flash of absolute disapproval. But then, she too smiled. It was not a warm or loving, motherly smile. It was a cold, deeply condescending look of total victory. She slowly nodded her head at me, proudly acknowledging my arrival at her event. She reached out and patted the empty velvet chair, sitting right beside her at the table. She was giving me a strict, silent command in front of the entire country club. She was telling me to walk over there, bow my head, apologize to my criminal brother, and retake my rightful place as the submissive family servant. They were all staring at me happily, waiting for my complete emotional surrender. They expected me to walk toward them with tears of regret in my eyes and beg for their precious forgiveness. I stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by the wealthiest elite people in the city, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, razor-sharp sense of pure justice. I did not walk toward the empty chair. I simply stood my ground, lifted my chin even higher, and stared right back at them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The clink of a silver spoon against crystal echoed through the massive ballroom. The hum of conversation among the 200 wealthy guests faded into an expectant silence. I stood near the back of the room, my crimson silk dress brushing against the floor, and watched my father make his move. Thomas Davis loved the spotlight more than his children. He stood up and smoothed the lapels of his black tuxedo. He held his champagne glass high and gave the room his best patriarchal smile. He walked toward the stage. The string quartet stopped playing. A hush fell over the crowd of prominent doctors, lawyers, and local politicians. My father stepped up to the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone. He cleared his throat and began to speak with the smooth cadence of a man who believed he owned the world. He started by welcoming everyone to the 50th annual Winter Gala. He talked about the history of our community and the importance of giving back. But his speech quickly pivoted to his favorite subject: himself. And by extension, his golden child son. My father puffed out his chest and told the crowd that the holiday season was a time to reflect on what mattered. He said it was a time to honor the foundation of our society, which was loyalty. He spoke about the Davis family name with intense reverence. He told the room that a true legacy was about passing down a tradition of pure excellence and absolute devotion to your bloodline. I watched Travis sitting at the center table. He was leaning back in his velvet chair, swirling his champagne, looking humble while exuding total arrogance. Chloe was resting her hand on his arm, making sure the chandelier light caught her brand new diamond necklace. They were playing the role of the successful couple. My father raised his voice, letting his tone swell with immense pride. He pointed directly at my brother. He told the entire ballroom that he was incredibly proud to watch his son carry the Davis legacy forward. He bragged about Travis and his supposedly brilliant mind for business. He had the audacity to mention the commercial real estate deal Travis had just secured. My father called Travis a financial visionary who knew how to build lasting wealth. He told the guests that Travis was the prime example of a Davis. Every word coming out of my father's mouth was a complete fabrication. He was standing on a brightly lit stage demanding deep respect for a desperate man who had stolen my life savings to pay off a gambling addiction. He was openly praising a criminal who had secretly forged his parents' signatures to take out a fraudulent second mortgage. My father was loudly cheering for the architect of his own impending homelessness. The psychological delusion of it all was breathtaking. I stood perfectly still, letting his arrogant lies wash over me. I felt a chilling sense of absolute clarity. My parents had built their social existence on a fragile lie. They valued the appearance of success so much, they were blind to the rot eating away at their foundation. They had sacrificed their loyal daughter just to protect the illusion of their perfect son. My father finished his speech by raising his glass to Travis and to the prosperous future of their family. The ballroom erupted in enthusiastic applause. People were clapping and smiling in agreement. Travis raised his glass in return, soaking in the admiration of the crowd. As the applause began to soften into a low murmur, I took a slow, deep breath. It was time. I stepped forward out of the shadows. I walked straight down the wide center aisle of the ballroom. The crimson silk of my dress caught the light, demanding attention with every step. The rhythmic click of my black stiletto heels on the polished hardwood floor seemed to cut straight through the fading applause. Heads began to turn rapidly. Conversations stopped dead. The guests watched me part the crowd. They saw a powerful woman moving with terrifying purpose. I did not look at Travis or Chloe. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father, who was still standing proudly behind the wooden podium. His smug smile began to falter the moment he saw me approaching the stage. His eyes widened in confusion, and a quick flash of panic crossed his aging face. He probably thought I was going to ruin his perfect moment by crying or making a pathetic scene. He probably thought I was coming up there to throw a hysterical, jealous fit. He had absolutely no idea what was happening. I walked up the 3 short steps onto the stage. I moved smoothly and calmly, stopping right next to my father. He opened his mouth to speak, to tell me to get down, to hiss a cruel threat under his breath. But I did not give him the chance to say a single word. I reached out and took the microphone directly out of his hand. I firmly and deliberately slid the metal cylinder from his fingers. The motion was so smooth and unexpected that he let it go. He stood there completely paralyzed by the audacity of my action. I stepped up to the center of the podium, physically displacing him from his position of power. I turned to face the 200 wealthy guests. The massive ballroom was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Every eye in the room was fixed entirely on me in my crimson dress. I looked down at Travis and Chloe. Their arrogant smiles had completely vanished, replaced by an expression of paralyzing dread. I looked at my mother, who had gone completely pale, her hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth. My father is absolutely right about legacy. I began my voice carrying clear and steady through the massive speakers. But let us look at what the Davis legacy actually costs. I stood at the wooden podium with the microphone gripped firmly in my hand. 200 of the wealthiest and most influential residents of Shaker Heights were staring at me in absolute dead silence. I could see the shock radiating through the ballroom. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. Waiters stood frozen against the walls, holding trays of champagne. I looked down at my father, Thomas, who was staring up at me with his mouth slightly open. He was completely stripped of his arrogant patriarch persona. I looked past him to my brother Travis and his wife Chloe. They were practically shrinking into their velvet chairs. I let the silence hang in the air for just another moment, letting the tension build until it was almost suffocating. Then, I slowly raised my left hand and gave a subtle nod toward the back of the room. High up in the balcony overlooking the ballroom was the audio-visual control booth. Earlier that afternoon, I had visited the club under the guise of testing the microphone. I had handed the young audio-visual technician 5 crisp $100 bills and a sleek silver flash drive. I told him to wait for my exact signal and then play the presentation without asking any questions. He was a struggling college student, and he happily agreed. Right on cue, the lighting in the grand ballroom dramatically dimmed. A massive mechanical projector screen began to slowly lower from the ceiling directly behind me. It hummed softly as it descended. When it locked into place, a blindingly bright image flashed onto the stark white canvas. It was massive. It was 20 feet wide and impossible for anyone in the room to ignore. I turned back to the microphone. What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is a federal wire transfer authorization form. I said, my voice echoing clearly off the high vaulted ceilings. It is dated just a few days before Thanksgiving. It shows a direct transfer of $185,000, moving from my personal savings account directly into a commercial holding account owned by my brother Travis Davis. I paused and pointed up at the screen. You might notice the signature at the bottom. It claims to be mine, but it is a crude, sloppy forgery. Travis stole my entire life savings because his supposedly brilliant real estate business is actually completely bankrupt. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The wealthy doctors and corporate lawyers who had just been clapping for Travis were now whispering frantically to each other. People were leaning forward in their seats, squinting at the undeniable proof displayed on the massive screen behind me. I looked right at Travis. He had gone a sickly shade of gray. He was gripping the edge of his table so hard, his knuckles were completely white. Chloe instinctively reached up and covered her brand new Cartier diamond necklace with her hand, as if she could somehow hide the stolen wealth she was wearing. I spoke directly to them over the microphone. Travis took that stolen money and he laundered it through his wife's luxury shopping sprees just yesterday, I told the crowd. He told her it was free money. but the federal bank investigators who froze his accounts on Friday morning strongly disagree. The whispers in the room suddenly grew much louder. The polished elite society of Shaker Heights absolutely despised scandal when it involved common theft. They were looking at Travis not as a visionary, but as a common, desperate thief. My mother, Susan, shot up from her chair. Her face was flushed with absolute furious panic. Caroline, she shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "Turn that screen off right now. You are ruining your brother's reputation. You are destroying this family over a petty misunderstanding." I looked down at my mother. She was still trying to protect her golden boy. She still believed I was the villain for demanding my stolen money back. I gave her a very cold, sad smile. "I am not destroying this family, Mom," I said softly into the microphone. "Travis already did that." I raised my hand and signaled the audiovisual booth one more time. The image on the giant screen shifted. The wire transfer vanished and was instantly replaced by a new set of highly confidential banking documents. This image was even more devastating than the first. It was a formal notice of default and a massive secondary mortgage deed. The numbers were stamped in bold black ink across the top of the page. $400,000. I waited for my parents to recognize the address listed on the property deed. It was their address. It was the beautiful, paid-off colonial estate they loved more than anything in the world. I watched the exact second the realization hit my father. He physically stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the table. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint right there on the ballroom floor. I leaned into the microphone, letting my voice carry the heavy, absolute truth. "You called me a bad sister for wanting my stolen life savings back," I said, staring directly into my mother's horrified eyes. "You told me I needed to be a supportive family member and apologize to the man who ruined my career. But tell me, Mom, did your golden boy mention that he secretly mortgaged your paid-off house to pay off his massive illegal sports betting debts? Did he happen to tell you that he forged both of your signatures on a $400,000 loan because his casino bookies were threatening to break his legs?" I pointed up at the screen behind me. "Did he tell you that because I froze his accounts and stopped my stolen money from clearing your home is officially entering foreclosure next week?" The silence in the ballroom was so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother let out a horrific, shattered gasp and collapsed back into her chair. She grabbed her chest, struggling to breathe as she stared at the forged signatures on the massive screen. My father slowly turned his head to look at Travis. The look in my father's eyes was no longer full of pride or legacy. It was filled with absolute, pure disgust and utter devastation. Travis tried to stand up. He raised his hands and opened his mouth, trying to formulate a lie, trying to spin the narrative like he always did. But there was no spin left. The numbers on the screen were absolute, irrefutable facts. The golden child was finally exposed to the entire world, not as a wealthy genius, but as a desperate addict who had secretly sold his parents' home right out from under them. I stood at the podium in my gorgeous red dress, looking out at the utter destruction of their perfect suburban illusion. I had brought the truth into the light, and I was going to make sure they looked at every single painful piece of it. I stood on the stage and just watched the exact moment my parents' world completely shattered. My father Thomas stared up at the massive projector screen with his mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He looked down at his empty hands and then back up at the forged signatures on the fraudulent second mortgage document. This was the man who had spent his entire life building a pristine reputation in Shaker Heights. Now, in front of 200 closest friends, business partners, and fellow country club members, his absolute financial ruin was broadcast on a 20-foot screen. He was looking at the undeniable proof that his perfect son secretly pushed him to the brink of foreclosure just to cover illegal gambling debts. My mother, Susan, was violently shaking in her velvet chair. She grabbed the edge of the white linen tablecloth so tightly, her knuckles turned completely white. She could not tear her eyes away from the terrifying numbers on the screen. The $400,000 loan was a death sentence for their comfortable retirement. She looked around the silent ballroom. She saw the prominent doctors and wealthy politicians staring at her with shock and pity. The elite society she had spent decades desperately trying to impress was currently witnessing her ultimate humiliation. She opened her mouth to defend her golden boy one last time, but no sound came out. They had thrown me away like garbage to protect a son who had sold the roof right over their heads. Then the heavy silence in the ballroom was shattered by a piercing, hysterical scream. It was Chloe. My sister-in-law jumped up from her seat, knocking her expensive crystal champagne glass onto the hardwood floor. The glass shattered into a dozen pieces, but nobody even flinched. Chloe stared up at the screen with absolute wild panic in her eyes. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on her. The massive commercial real estate deal was a total lie. The huge lump sum of cash she had been bragging about was actually my stolen life savings. Her entire luxury lifestyle was built on federal wire fraud and money laundering. She saw the wealthy wives she had spent months trying to impress, staring at her with absolute horror. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Somebody turn that screen off right now." She hiked up the skirt of her expensive designer gown and began sprinting toward the back of the ballroom. She was frantically aiming straight for the audiovisual control booth. She honestly believed that if she could just unplug the projector, she could somehow stop the nightmare from happening. She scrambled past the elegant tables, pushing past the paralyzed waiters. I did not panic. I simply stood at the podium, looking incredibly calm in my crimson-red silk dress. I slowly raised my left hand and gave one final deliberate nod toward the young technician in the balcony. The massive screen went dark for a second. Chloe stopped running, thinking she had somehow won. But then the giant speakers mounted in the corners of the ballroom suddenly cracked to life. It was not another document. It was crystal clear audio. "Oh, this little thing." My sister-in-law's smug, breathy voice suddenly echoed through the silent country club. Travis completely surprised me with it yesterday. He has just been working so incredibly hard lately, and he wanted to celebrate his massive new real estate windfall. Chloe froze completely dead in her tracks. She stood perfectly still in the middle of the center aisle, staring up at the ceiling in pure terror as her own voice was broadcast to the entire room. Travis just secured an enormous amount of liquid capital. The recording continued playing loudly for every single guest to hear. We practically spent a down payment on a house between this necklace and the bag. But Travis said it did not matter. He said the cash was ours to do whatever we wanted with. He said it was basically free money. The audio recording clicked off, leaving the massive ballroom in a deafening, heavy silence. I looked down at Chloe. She was standing exactly where she had stopped, surrounded by the most elite women in Shaker Heights. The wealthy doctors' wives who had been admiring her Cartier diamond necklace just days ago were now staring at her with absolute total disgust. They physically took a step back from her, pulling their designer dresses closer to their bodies, as if Chloe was suddenly carrying a highly contagious disease. They realized she was standing in their prestigious country club, wearing diamonds purchased with stolen money. Chloe looked down at her chest. Her hand slowly reached up to touch the sparkling Cartier necklace resting against her collarbone. The diamonds that had made her feel like royalty just an hour ago now looked like a heavy, glowing chain wrapped tightly around her neck. She was wearing physical proof of a federal crime. She looked back at me, standing powerfully at the podium. Her perfect, carefully crafted social image was completely obliterated. There would be no more invitations to charity luncheons or exclusive shopping trips. She was officially a pariah. The women she desperately wanted to call her peers were looking at her like she was a common criminal. I kept my posture perfectly straight and looked directly into her terrified eyes. For years, she had mocked me. She had flaunted her stolen wealth right in my face and tried to make me feel small. She had proudly bragged about spending my life savings without an ounce of guilt. Now she was completely broken, stripped of her fake luxury, and exposed to the entire world. I did not need to scream or fight her. I had simply held up a mirror to her terrible actions and let the absolute truth destroy her. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was suddenly broken by the sound of the thick mahogany double doors swinging wide open. I stood perfectly still at the wooden podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy guests. Everyone turned their heads toward the grand entrance. They were expecting to see more waiters bringing out the next course of the expensive gala dinner. Instead, they saw two tall men wearing dark practical suits, walking with absolute terrifying purpose right into the center of the room. The country club security guards usually stopped anyone who was not on the strict guest list, but these men had completely bypassed them. You cannot stop federal agents when they are executing an official warrant. The two investigators did not look at the beautiful ice sculptures or the lavish floral arrangements. They kept their eyes completely locked on the center premium table where my brother Travis was sitting. The entire room parted for them like the Red Sea. The prominent doctors and corporate lawyers instinctively stepped back, recognizing the undeniable authority radiating from these two stern men. Wire fraud and massive bank fraud are not simple local matters that can be quietly swept under the rug. They are severe federal crimes that bring immediate and devastating consequences. The agents walked right up to the velvet chairs where my terrified family was seated. My father, Thomas, stood up, trying desperately to block their path. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his vast wealth and social status to intimidate them. He demanded to know what they were doing, crashing a private, highly exclusive charity event. The lead federal investigator did not even blink at my father's pathetic display of power. He calmly held up a shiny federal badge and looked right past my father. He spoke loudly enough for all the surrounding elite tables to hear every single word. He stated my brother's full legal name and announced that Travis was officially under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and severe identity theft. A massive collective gasp echoed across the perfectly decorated ballroom. The elite society of Shaker Heights watched in absolute pure shock as the golden child, the supposed brilliant visionary of the Davis legacy, was firmly ordered to stand up and turn around. Travis was physically shaking so hard, his champagne glass tipped over onto the white linen tablecloth. All of his arrogant, unbothered confidence had completely evaporated into thin air. He looked exactly like a terrified little boy caught in a massive lie. He slowly stood up and obediently placed his trembling hands behind his back. The cold, sharp click of the metal handcuffs snapping shut around my brother's wrists echoed loudly in the incredibly quiet room. It was the absolute final nail in the coffin of their perfect, flawless family image. Travis tried to look over at me standing at the podium, but I kept my face totally blank, showing him absolutely zero pity. Chloe was standing nearby, violently covering her mouth with both of her hands. She was staring at the heavy steel cuffs binding her successful husband's hands together. The horrific reality was finally hitting her, that her luxurious lifestyle was completely over forever. The expensive designer handbag she was clutching suddenly looked like a piece of completely worthless garbage. The federal agents calmly read Travis his rights and began to firmly escort him right down the main center aisle of the ballroom. They paraded the great real estate mogul out of the prestigious country club like a common, desperate street criminal. As Travis was marched out the front mahogany doors, the absolute brutal reality of the situation finally crashed down on my aging parents. Their carefully crafted social illusion was completely dead and permanently destroyed. But far more importantly, the horrible, undeniable truth about the $400,000 secondary mortgage was staring them right in the face. My mother, Susan, and my father, Thomas, suddenly realized they were completely flat broke and on the absolute terrifying brink of losing their beautiful, paid-off colonial estate. Susan let out a desperate, sobbing cry. She stumbled forward, practically tripping over the hem of her expensive, silver-beaded gown, and ran straight toward the wooden podium where I was standing. My father followed right behind her, his face completely pale and his eyes wide with absolute blind panic. They rushed up to the stage, completely abandoning all of their precious dignity and social grace. My mother desperately grabbed my arm, tears heavily streaming down her face and completely ruining her perfect makeup. "Caroline," she sobbed heavily, her voice cracking with raw, terrifying desperation. "You have to help us right now. You have to call your attorney and tell the bank it was just a terrible mistake. We are going to lose the house, Caroline, and we will have nowhere to go. You have to fix this massive mess right now, please." My father stood next to her, his hands trembling. He looked at me with sad, begging eyes, completely forgetting that just an hour ago he had fully expected me to blindly apologize to the man who ruined my life. They were actually begging the invisible, submissive daughter to save them from the exact greedy monster they had so proudly created. I looked down at my mother's hand tightly gripping my arm. I slowly and firmly pulled my arm away from her desperate grasp. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless and unloved. I stood tall in my crimson red silk dress, feeling incredibly strong and perfectly calm. I looked my mother directly in her panicked, crying eyes. "For 28 years, you told me I needed to sacrifice everything for the good of this family." I said, my voice steady and perfectly clear. "You told me my life savings was just collateral damage." "Mom," I said softly, "now it is your turn to sacrifice your house for him." The weeks following the Winter Gala were an absolute whirlwind of intense legal proceedings and severe federal actions. Travis was immediately denied bail due to the sheer severity of his massive financial crimes and the significant flight risk he posed. He sat alone in a cold, sterile federal holding cell while his carefully constructed fake real estate empire rapidly collapsed into a pile of worthless dust. The federal agents wasted absolutely no time dismantling his entire fraudulent life. They immediately seized his commercial bank accounts, permanently freezing whatever little cash was left inside them. The shiny imported luxury sports car he loved to flaunt around Shaker Heights was aggressively towed right out of his driveway by the federal authorities. Every single asset he claimed to own was placed under strict government control to be auctioned off to pay his massive debts. Attorney Richard Hayes kept me closely updated on every single minor development. Travis was officially facing multiple felony charges of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and massive bank fraud. He had spent years arrogantly pretending to be a brilliant self-made millionaire while secretly drowning in dangerous illegal sports betting debts. Now the entire city knew the pathetic, ugly truth about his life. The great Travis Davis, the untouchable golden child who could do no wrong, was completely ruined. He had permanently lost his freedom, his precious reputation, and his entire future, all because of his own uncontrollable greed and profound arrogance. While my brother sat in a county jail, waiting for his inevitable criminal trial, I was finally able to focus entirely on rebuilding my own shattered life. My primary goal was getting my stolen life savings back from the bank. Richard Hayes and I spent several long, exhausting days meeting with the senior fraud investigation department at my local bank branch. Because we had handed the federal authorities an ironclad digital dossier, including the absolute, undeniable proof that Travis had blatantly forged my signature on the wire transfer documents, the bank had absolutely no choice but to completely validate my claim. The internal bank investigation moved surprisingly fast once the federal criminal charges were officially filed against my brother. Exactly 3 weeks after the disastrous country club gala, I sat alone at my small kitchen table and slowly opened my secure banking application on my phone. My heart pounded heavily in my chest as the loading screen spun in a circle. And then, I finally saw it. The bank had fully activated their internal fraud protection insurance policy. My checking account balance was completely restored. $185,000 sat safely and securely under my name. I stared at the bright numbers on the glowing screen and felt a massive, heavy physical weight completely lift off my tired shoulders. It was the exact money I had worked 10 long, hard years to save. It represented my independence, my personal security, and my future. Travis had desperately tried to steal my entire life from me, but he had failed miserably. I was finally financially secure again. But Travis was certainly not the only one paying a massive, heavy price for his intense greed and deception. Chloe was about to learn a very harsh, painful lesson about the severe consequences of spending stolen money. She had proudly and loudly bragged to the entire country club about her massive shopping sprees, completely unaware that she was effectively confessing to federal money laundering on a crystal-clear audio recording. Just a few short days after the gala, federal agents showed up unannounced at the front door of their leased luxury townhouse. They did not come to ask polite, gentle questions. They arrived with official federal seizure warrants. They aggressively demanded the brand new Cartier diamond necklace Chloe had so arrogantly flaunted at the holiday party. They meticulously confiscated her expensive designer handbags, her premium imported shoes, and every single luxury item she had happily purchased with my stolen savings. Chloe was forced to physically hand over her precious status symbols to stern, unsmiling federal investigators right in the middle of her own living room. The agents carefully bagged and tagged the sparkling diamonds and leather bags as official evidence of a major federal crime. Chloe was left standing in her empty, quiet hallway, completely stripped of her fake wealth and her stolen glory. She had always valued luxury and social status above absolutely everything else in the world, and now she had absolutely nothing to show for it, except a massive mountain of terrible public shame. The resulting social fallout for Chloe was absolutely devastating and incredibly swift. The wealthy elite women of Shaker Heights completely shunned her, avoiding her like a literal plague. Her phone instantly stopped ringing, and her social calendar became completely empty. Realizing that her luxurious, comfortable lifestyle was permanently over, and that her husband was facing decades in a federal penitentiary, Chloe did exactly what selfish, superficial people always do. She filed for a very messy, highly public divorce. She desperately tried to distance herself from Travis, claiming to the local newspapers that she had absolutely no idea where the money came from. But the severe damage to her reputation was already permanently done. With absolutely no income, no assets, and zero social standing, Chloe could no longer afford to live in their expensive leased townhouse. She was brutally forced to pack her remaining cheap clothes into basic cardboard boxes and move back into her parents' damp, unfinished basement. The arrogant woman who had constantly mocked me for my modest, reliable lifestyle and quiet bookkeeping career was now sleeping on a terrible, creaky twin bed in a dark basement completely isolated from the wealthy society she so desperately craved. She had tried to destroy my future, but in the very end, she completely destroyed her own. Justice had finally been served, and it was incredibly thorough and absolute. I was finally free to live my life entirely on my own strong, confident terms. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable night at the Winter Gala. 6 months since the flawless, perfect illusion of the Davis family completely and permanently shattered in front of the entire Shaker Heights elite. Today, the weather outside is beautiful and warm, but the harsh reality for my parents is incredibly cold and deeply unforgiving. Thomas and Susan were utterly and completely destroyed by the massive fraudulent second mortgage Travis secretly took out on their property. The commercial bank gave them absolutely no mercy and zero extensions on their massive debt. Without my stolen life savings to cover the huge illegal gambling debts, the bank aggressively moved forward with the formal legal foreclosure process. My parents tried desperately to find a way out of their massive, terrifying financial black hole. They shamelessly begged their wealthy country club friends for temporary personal loans to save their status. They frantically tried to leverage my father's old corporate business contacts to somehow stop the bleeding. But the brutal, highly public nature of Travis being arrested by federal agents in steel handcuffs at the most prestigious social event of the year made them complete social pariahs in their community. Nobody in their right mind wanted anything to do with a toxic family drowning in federal wire fraud and massive public scandal. Unable to save their precious historic home, my parents were brutally forced to put their beloved colonial estate up for a rapid distress sale, just to satisfy the angry banking authorities and pay their rapidly mounting legal fees. I drove slowly past the grand house on the exact day they officially moved out. There was no grand farewell party for them. There were no wealthy, friendly neighbors standing on the manicured sidewalks to wish them well on their new journey. There was only a cheap, battered moving truck sitting awkwardly in the long circular driveway. My parents had to quietly and shamefully sell off most of their expensive antique furniture, their imported luxury cars, and their exclusive country club memberships, just to stay financially afloat. Today, Thomas and Susan live in a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the absolute opposite side of town, far away from the sweeping driveways and massive lawns of Shaker Heights. They spend their long, empty days sitting in a small, dim living room, completely isolated from the high society they worshipped their entire adult lives. They lost absolutely everything to protect a golden child son who never truly cared about them or their future. And as for Travis, the great financial visionary of the Davis legacy, his story ended exactly where it truly belonged. The federal prosecutors did not offer him any lenient plea deals or special treatment. The digital evidence we provided was far too overwhelming, and his severe crimes involved crossing state lines to launder stolen money to pay dangerous illegal sports gambling syndicates. During his formal sentencing hearing, I sat quietly in the very back of the cold federal courtroom and watched the former golden child stand before a stern, uncompromising federal judge. He looked so incredibly small, weak, and entirely defeated. His expensive, tailored designer suits were permanently gone, completely replaced by a standard rough canvas orange prison uniform. The judge looked down at him with pure disgust and officially sentenced Travis to 5 full years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole. He is currently serving his hard time in a highly secure facility surrounded by cold, thick concrete walls and terrifying razor wire. He has absolutely no access to luxury commercial real estate deals, expensive sports cars, or high-end champagne. He has 5 long, agonizing years to sit in a tiny, lonely cell and think deeply about the loyal sister he maliciously tried to destroy. While their toxic world completely collapsed into ash and ruin, my life finally blossomed into something incredibly beautiful and deeply fulfilling. With my $185,000 safely and securely restored to my bank account by the Fraud Protection Department, I finally took the ultimate massive step toward my own true independence. 3 months ago, I bought my absolute dream house. It is a gorgeous, historic property sitting on a quiet, peaceful, tree-lined street in a wonderful neighborhood. It has a huge, beautiful wraparound porch where I sit every single morning with my hot coffee, just listening to the birds singing and enjoying the profound, absolute peace of my brand new life. There is no loud, angry yelling in this beautiful house. There are no cruel, condescending remarks about my simple clothes or my quiet, steady career. There is just warm, bright sunlight, deep, comfortable silence, and total, absolute freedom. My professional life completely mirrored my new personal happiness and soaring self-esteem. For 10 long years, I had quietly kept my head down at my corporate accounting firm, doing the tedious, exhausting heavy lifting, while other lazy people casually took the credit for my brilliant work. I had acted exactly the way my toxic parents heavily conditioned me to act all my life. But the strong, confident woman who stood up at the winter gala in a bold crimson-red dress and took the microphone right out of her father's hand was no longer afraid of taking up massive space in the world. I walked into my annual corporate performance review last month with total, unwavering confidence. I presented my managing directors with a detailed, meticulous portfolio of my specific daily accomplishments and the massive financial growth I had personally secured for the entire firm over the last fiscal year. They were completely stunned by my newfound commanding presence and articulate, strong demands. Just 3 weeks ago, I was officially promoted to Vice President of Finance. I now have the beautiful, massive corner office, the huge executive salary, and the absolute professional respect I always deserved but never demanded until now. I am currently surrounded by wonderful, genuine friends who love me exactly for who I am. I regularly host small, elegant dinner parties on my beautiful wraparound porch as the sun sets. My amazing friends do not care about elite country club memberships or extremely expensive designer labels. They care about deep honesty, genuine kindness, and mutual loving respect. We laugh loudly, we share wonderful home-cooked meals, and we support each other completely through the good times and the bad. For 28 long years, I truly believed I was just a dull background character in my own life. I deeply thought I was simply a quiet, reliable bookkeeper, destined to blindly serve the arrogant, selfish people around me. I was so incredibly wrong about my own massive potential. I am the strong, fearless hero of my own story, and I built this beautiful, amazing life entirely with my own two hands and my own unbreakable spirit. As I sit here on my peaceful wooden porch, looking out at the beautiful, bright flowers I planted myself, I realize that sharing this deeply personal story is the absolute final step in my long, emotional healing process. I know there are wonderful, beautiful people out there listening to this right now who feel exactly the way I felt for 28 long, agonizing years. I want to speak directly to the camera and directly to you right now. I need you to listen to me very carefully and deeply. Internalize these exact words into your heart. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit you. Society constantly tells us that family is absolutely everything, and that we must always blindly compromise our own happiness for them. We are aggressively conditioned from the time we are helpless little children to believe that we must endlessly forgive the people who happen to share our last name. We are repeatedly told to keep the peace, to swallow our massive pride, and to turn the other cheek no matter how many times we are violently struck down or completely ignored by our relatives. But that highly toxic societal mindset is nothing but a heavy psychological chain designed to keep innocent victims completely silent and perfectly obedient to their abusers. I spent my whole life trying to be the reliable daughter. I truly believed that if I simply asked for less and gave them more, they would eventually see my true, incredible value. I convinced myself that my endless, painful sacrifices would automatically earn their genuine love and their basic human respect. But I eventually had to wake up and face a deeply devastating reality. I was just an ATM to them. I was a highly convenient backup plan, a completely reliable safety net, and a quiet punching bag they could use whenever the precious golden child failed. They did not love my quiet nature because they respected my modesty or my hard work. They loved it because it made me incredibly easy to manipulate, blindside, and control. The very moment I finally stepped out of line and fiercely demanded basic human fairness, they viciously turned on me without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. They demanded I completely sacrifice my entire financial future and my own absolute happiness just to protect the terrible criminal actions of my brother. They genuinely wanted me to completely set myself on fire just to keep their precious fake social image warm for a few more days. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. So many of us are absolutely terrified of being permanently labeled as the bad guy in the false family narrative. We are deeply afraid of causing a massive dramatic scene or supposedly ruining a special family holiday gathering. My mother loudly told me I was ruining our family when I bravely exposed Travis at the gala. She desperately tried to make me feel terrible for telling the absolute, undeniable truth. But you are never the true villain for simply refusing to be a willing victim. You are not destroying a family by exposing their terrible toxic behavior and their illegal actions. They destroyed the family the exact second they decided your well-being and your bright future did not matter to them. Setting a strong, firm boundary is the most profound, beautiful act of self-love you can ever practice in your entire life. Sometimes holding people accountable is the only way to protect your peace. I had to let my older brother go to a federal prison. I had to sit back and watch my aging parents lose their beautiful, beloved home and all of their wealthy, high society friends. I had to completely walk away from the only family unit I ever knew. It was incredibly terrifying and deeply painful at first to face that massive, silent void. But the profound, incredible peace I feel today in my heart is worth absolutely every single tear I ever cried over them. I sleep perfectly soundly through the night. I wake up every morning in a beautiful, spacious house that I fully own, with money that I honestly earned, and I never have to apologize for existing ever again. If my long, difficult journey has taught me anything, it is that true family is entirely about how people actively and consistently treat you. It is about mutual, deep respect, unwavering honesty, and genuine support when times get incredibly hard. It is not simply about shared genetics or a common childhood address. You have the absolute total right to carefully choose who gets to be in your beautiful life, and you have the fundamental right to completely remove anyone who brings you pain, distress, and exploitation. You do not need their permission to finally be happy and free. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members, let me know in the comments. You are not alone. Please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more stories about claiming your worth. Take care of yourselves because you deserve it.